My husband's sister stood up at his own funeral lunch in front of half the town and called me a thief. She did it with her plate still in her hand, in the church basement where I'd served funeral suppers for 45 years, and she pointed her fork at me across the folding tables and said, loud enough that the whole room went still, "You married my brother for that store. You cut him off from his own family. You turned him against me, and you've been robbing him blind for years. And now he's gone, and you think it's all yours. Well, you're not a Hartwell. You never were. You're a thief, Audrey. And before I'm through, every soul in this town is going to know exactly what you are." I had buried Lloyd that morning. 46 years of marriage. The last 2 of them spent nursing him through the cancer in our own bed. And I had not slept a full night in a year. And I stood there in that church basement in my black dress, holding a tray of egg salad, 72 years old, while my husband's sister told the town that had known me my whole adult life that I was a liar and a robber and an outsider who'd stolen a dead man blind. What Glenda did not know, as she pointed that fork at me, was that for 45 years I had kept the books of that store by hand, every single day, in ledgers she was certain had been buried right along with my husband. And those ledgers did not just tell the truth about me, they told the truth about everyone who had ever put a hand in that till, including her. By the time I was done, the word thief was going to land exactly where it belonged, and it was not going to be on me. But I'm getting ahead of myself. My name is Audrey. I'm 72 years old, and I live in a small town in Vermont. The kind of town that's one church, one school, one blinking yellow light, and one general store. And the store was mine, Hartwell's. It sat on the corner of Main and Bridge for 110 years. 3 generations of Hartwells behind that counter, and I married into it at 25 and stood behind that counter myself for the next 45. I sold this town its nails and its penny candy and its wood stove pipe and its sympathy cards. I extended credit to families having a hard winter and never wrote it on anything but my own private list. And I carried some of them for years and never said a word. A storekeeper learns a town from the inside of its pockets. You know who's struggling and who's flush, who pays cash and who's too proud to ask for credit, who's good for it and who never will be. And I kept the books, every day, by hand, in green cloth-bound ledgers, the way Lloyd's father had taught me when I was a young bride, and the family still wasn't sure about the outsider their boy had married. I want you to hold on to that. The part about the books kept by hand for 45 years. Because it's the hinge the whole thing turns on. Glenda looked at me and saw a sentimental old woman who'd never let go of her dead husband's store. She forgot that the woman who keeps the books knows where every dollar in the building has ever been. There is one ledger in particular I'll come back to, the current one, the one Glenda was certain had gone in the ground with Lloyd, because what was in it changed everything. But you have to understand the whole of it first, the marriage and the resentment, and what Glenda chose. So let me start where I started in this family, which was on the outside of it, looking in. I was not born a Hartwell. I want to say that plainly and early, because it turned out to be the whole taproot of the thing. I grew up poor, 2 towns over. My father a hired man on other people's dairy farms. My mother taking in washing. And we moved every couple of years when the work dried up. And I learned young what it is to be the new family that the established families look at sideways. When Lloyd Hartwell, the only son of the family that owned the store, the closest thing our corner of Vermont had to gentry, started courting me at a barn dance when I was 24, his people were not pleased, and they did not trouble much to hide it. The Hartwells had 100 years and a brick house and a name over a store. I had one good dress and a father who spelled of other men's cattle. Lloyd's mother let me know, in the 1,000 small, frosty ways that respectable women have, that I was not at all what she'd pictured for her boy. And Glenda, Lloyd's younger sister, made it her life's work to remind me, for 46 years, that I'd married up, and never quite up far enough. But Lloyd's father, old Harold Hartwell, surprised them all. Because the week after Lloyd and I married, that gruff old man took me into the back office of the store, set a green cloth-bound ledger in front of me, handed me a pen, and watched me balance a column of figures faster than his own son ever could. And something in his face changed. He'd expected a gold-digging hired girl, and he'd gotten a young woman with a head for numbers and a back that didn't bend. And from that day, Harold Hartwell treated me like the daughter he'd needed and never had. He taught me the books himself, every line of them. Taught me to keep them by hand, daily, in ink, no matter what, because, he said, a store that can't say where its money went isn't a store. It's a charity that hasn't admitted it yet. I kept those books his way for the next 45 years. And it half broke Glenda's heart, I think, and turned the other half to something harder, that her own father had handed the ledgers and the trust and the open affection to the outsider, while she stood in the doorway watching, the daughter who'd been born to it, and somehow passed over for a hired man's girl. I ran that store for 45 years, Hartwell's, on the corner of Main and Bridge. 110 years old, 3 generations behind the counter and me the 4th. Even if my name had been bought with a wedding ring instead of blood. I sold this town its 16-penny nails and its penny candy and its stovepipe and its sympathy cards and its valentines. I extended credit to families having a bad winter and wrote it on nothing but my own private list, and carried some of them for years and never once said a word. Not at church, not at the diner, not to my own husband. I knew this town from the inside of its pockets, which is the truest way there is to know anybody. And every single night, after the bell stopped ringing and the door was locked, I sat in the back and kept the books, in old Harold's green ledgers, in my own steady hand. 45 years of them, stacked in the storeroom above the post office boxes. I want you to hold on to that. The books kept by hand for 45 years. Because it is the hinge the whole thing turns on. Glenda looked at her brother's widow and saw a sentimental old woman clinging to a dead man's shop. She forgot that the woman who keeps the books for 45 years knows where every last dollar in the building has ever been, and wrote it down. Let me set this tray down a minute, because I've been talking a while, and it would do me good to know who's keeping an old storekeeper company tonight. Wherever you are, whatever town, leave it down below where I can see it. A store goes awful quiet after you lock the door and the bell stops ringing. And a little company, even the kind I'll never see across a counter, is a comfort I've learned not to take for granted. There now, where was I? Glenda, and the sore tooth, and what it finally bit down on. For most of those 46 years, Glenda's resentment was just weather to me. A cold front that blew through at Thanksgiving and Christmas. A remark about my people. A little reminder that I was a guest in a house I'd given my whole life to. I learned to live under it, the way you learn to live under any climate, by keeping a sweater handy and not expecting July. What I did not understand, not until it was very nearly too late, was that across all those decades of circling that store and resenting it, Glenda had not only been resenting it, she had been quietly, steadily, helping herself to it. The cold front had a hand in it the whole time, and I, keeping my honest books in the back room every night, had been writing down the proof of it for 30 years, without ever letting myself add up what the column came to. But I'll come to that, because the order it came out in is the whole point. And it did not come out until the very day she was sure she'd won. But I'll get to that, because first I have to tell you about Lloyd's dying, since that's where Glenda's weather turned to something with teeth. Lloyd got sick 3 years ago, and the last 2 years were the hard kind, the long downhill kind where you lose the man in pieces before you lose him all at once. And I nursed him at home through every single day of it, because that is what you do for the man you've loved since you were 24 years old. I learned the pills and the schedules and the lifting. I learned to sleep in a chair with one ear open. I learned to smile at him in the morning so that fear wouldn't be the first thing he saw. And here is the thing that became, later, the very weapon Glenda turned on me. As Lloyd weakened, I took over everything, all of it, the store, the suppliers, the bank, the payroll, because somebody had to keep a 110-year-old business alive, and I was the one who'd kept its books for 45 years anyway. There came a day Lloyd couldn't hold a pen steady enough to sign the supplier checks. And so, at his own insistence, propped up in our bed, he had me add my name to the store accounts, so the lights would stay on and Donna would get paid and the doors would open. It was the most ordinary thing 2 married people have ever done. A wife of 46 years keeping her dying husband's life's work breathing for him while he died. But to Glenda, who came circling around at the very end, playing the devoted, grief-stricken sister she had never once been in 5 decades, it did not look ordinary at all. It looked like the hired man's daughter finally getting her hands on the Hartwell money, while the rightful Hartwell lay dying and couldn't stop her. That is the story she chose to tell. And she chose it, I think, before Lloyd was even cold. That I had isolated my own husband from his loving family. That I had turned him against his sister. That I had used the cover of his illness to put my name on everything and rob him blind. And the cruelest genius of it, the part that made it nearly unbeatable, was that the one man on earth who could have laughed her story out of the room, the one man who knew to the exact penny what I had done and why, and at whose own insistence, was in the ground. The dead can't testify. Lloyd was gone. And Glenda stood in the great silence he left behind and told the town any story she pleased, and there was no one left to say otherwise. No one, that is, but 45 years of green ledgers she was certain didn't exist. It started at the funeral lunch, with the fork, and then it spread, the way a thing spreads in a small town, which is to say, like a grass fire across a dry August hayfield. And Glenda was good at it. I'll give the devil her due. She didn't shriek it in the street, because shrieking you can dismiss. She did it in the soft, sorrowful, deeply concerned voice that is so much more poisonous, leaning in close at the post office after the service at church, over the lunch counter at the diner, to anyone who'd lean in with her. I just worry about where all my brother's money went, that's all I'm saying. You know she had her name put on everything right there at the end, when he was too sick to know. I'm not accusing anybody, I'm just saying it's strange, and a sister wonders. That is all it takes. I'm just saying it's strange. You don't have to prove a thing, you just have to set the question loose, and let a small town's imagination do the rest.
And people who had known me for 45 years, people I'd carried on store credit through hard winters, people I'd sold the sympathy cards for their own buried mothers, began to look at me a half-second too long at the meat case. The talk got back to me the way it always does in a town this size, through the kindness of a friend who thinks you ought to know what's being said. That Audrey Hartwell had drained poor Lloyd dry while he was dying. That the store was surely mortgaged to the rafters. That the hired man's daughter had finally shown the town her true colours after 45 years of fooling everybody. I would walk into my own church, the church where I'd married Lloyd and buried him, and feel the shape of the conversation change when I came through the door. And then Glenda hired a lawyer and moved to contest Lloyd's will. The will he'd signed years before, clear-eyed and healthy, that left everything, the store and the house and the modest savings, to me, his wife of 46 years. She claimed I'd used undue influence on a dying man. She claimed the accounts wouldn't add up under scrutiny, and she formally demanded a full accounting of every dollar that had moved through Hartwell's in the last 5 years. Because she was certain, you see, dead certain, that a sentimental old widow's idea of bookkeeping was a cigar box of crumpled receipts that would fall apart the instant a real lawyer started asking questions. She was so sure my books would hang me that she went to a court and demanded to see them. Remember that. It matters more than anything else in this story. I have to be fair, even now, because the truth always has more than one room, and lying awake in that emptied-out house, I made myself walk through the other rooms. Glenda had lost her brother. I have to believe some part of what drove her was real grief, twisted as it came out. The grief of a woman who'd spent her whole life feeling like the second most important person in her own family, and now had no brother left to be second to. And underneath the greed and the resentment, there was an old hurt. A little girl who'd watched her parents hand the ledgers and the love to a stranger. I understood it. I even pitied it. But understanding why a person is swinging the axe does not require you to stand still and let it land. I'd learned that much in 45 years behind a counter, smiling at people on their worst days. That was the season I stopped sleeping, and worse, stopped eating, stopped opening the store some mornings. Because here is the thing, a smear does that a simple theft never could. A thief takes your money, and you know you've been wronged. But a liar takes your good name. And the terrible trick of it is that it makes you doubt yourself. Alone in that house, with the whole town murmuring, with my husband's own family calling me a thief, I started, God help me, to wonder. Not whether I'd stolen, I knew I hadn't, but whether it mattered that I hadn't. Whether a good name built over 45 honest years could simply be taken from a person by someone willing to lie about it loudly enough and long enough. Whether the truth even had a fighting chance against a story people would rather believe. And I started to think the unthinkable thought, the one that nearly ended it. And I'll be honest with you, because this is the truest part. I nearly just gave it all to her. I nearly signed the store over and walked away from 110 years of it. My lawyer, a sharp and decent woman named Ms. Pelletier, over in the county seat, had laid it out for me straight, the way good lawyers do. Yes, I could fight it, but contesting an estate is a long, ugly public business, she said. It could drag through the county court for a year or more. It would mean depositions and hearings, and the whole town watching every private dollar of a 46-year marriage get hauled out and picked over by lawyers in a panelled room. And I was 72 years old, and 3 weeks a widow. And so tired, so far down past bone tired of being looked at sideways at the meat case. I sat at my own kitchen table one night with the settlement papers Glenda's lawyer had sent. The papers that would make all of it stop the moment I signed. That would hand her the store and the house and let me crawl off somewhere quiet to finish out my days. And I had the pen in my hand. It would be so easy. Just give the sawtooth the thing it had ached for since 1979 and let the talk die down and live out my time in peace. Even if peace meant a whole town quietly believing to the end of my days that Lloyd Hartwell's widow was a thief. I had genuinely begun to believe that a woman my age, this tired and this alone, simply did not have the strength left in her to stand up and defend her own good name. And then I thought about the ledgers, stacked up there in the dark above the post office boxes. 45 years of them, waiting. And I put the pen down. The green cloth-bound ledgers, 45 years of them, stacked in the storeroom above the post office boxes where I'd kept them my whole married life. The ones Glenda was so sure had been a sentimental shoebox, or had gone in the ground with Lloyd, or simply didn't exist anymore, because a woman like me couldn't possibly have kept real books. And I put the pen down, because I realized something, sitting there, that steadied my whole spine. Glenda was demanding an accounting. She was so certain my books would damn me that she'd gone to a lawyer and formally demanded to see every dollar. She had, in her arrogance, asked for the one thing in this world that was going to destroy her. Because I had kept those books, honestly, every single day for 45 years. And honest books don't just clear the honest, they convict the guilty. And there was only one other person who'd ever had a key to that till. I want to slow down here, because this is where the storekeeper went to work. And a storekeeper's books turned out to be the very last thing that sawtooth should ever have bitten down on. I went up to the storeroom above the post office boxes, and I brought down all 45 years of them, green ledger after green ledger, smelling of dust and old paper and Lloyd's father's pipe. And I carried them to Ms. Pelletier's office, and she brought in a forensic accountant she trusted, a quiet, thorough young man, and together the three of us did exactly the thing Glenda had so confidently demanded of a court. We accounted for every dollar. And what those ledgers showed, page after page, in my own careful hand, stretching back 4.5 decades, was a store run honestly down to the penny. Every withdrawal documented, every line of credit I'd ever extended to a struggling family, written down with the date and the reason. Every single dollar of Lloyd's that had passed through my hands during his 2 years of dying, spent on suppliers and on payroll and on his own medicine and his own hospital bills, with the receipts stapled right there to the page beside the entry. Because that is how old Harold Hartwell taught a frightened young bride to keep books in 1979, and how she'd kept them every day since. There was no missing money. There was no draining of a dying man. There was a wife who had kept her husband's business breathing while he could not, and had written down every last cent of it as she went. My name was clean. 45 years of honest ink said so, in a voice no lawyer on earth can cross-examine. Because you cannot trip up or confuse or shame a column of figures written down contemporaneously by a steady hand decades before anyone thought to accuse you of anything. But that, it turned out, was only the half of it. Because once the accountant began laying my ledgers down beside the actual bank records, year by year, a second story rose up out of those pages. one I had half known for 30 years and never once let myself look at head-on. Money had been leaving the store, going back long before Lloyd ever got sick. In steady sums I had recorded faithfully, because I recorded everything faithfully, with 3 small letters and a word. G, loan. G, advance. G, loan. Page after page, year after year. Because Lloyd, soft-hearted about his little sister to the very end, ashamed of the old wound between her and the family, had been quietly slipping Glenda money for 3 decades. Money she swore each time she'd pay back, and never once did. And when the accountant finally totaled it all, the sum was large enough to stop your breath in your chest. The woman who had stood up at her brother's funeral and pointed a fork at me and called me a thief in front of the whole town was the one who had actually been bleeding that store, and that man, for 30 years. She had screamed thief at the top of her lungs for the oldest reason in the world. Because the loudest possible way to hide your own hand in the till is to shriek and point at somebody else's. And she had demanded that accounting, marched into a court and demanded it, certain it would bury me, never once dreaming that the honest books she was so sure didn't exist would dig up her instead. I'd like to tell you there was a grand courtroom scene, the kind where the truth gets read out loud and the guilty one breaks down in the witness box. But the truth was quieter than that, and far more final for being quiet. Ms. Pelletier simply gathered it all up. My 45 years of green ledgers and the matching bank records and the accountant's plain report, and sent the complete accounting to Glenda's lawyer. And Glenda's lawyer, who turned out to be an honest man who had plainly been told a very different story by his client, read every page of it. And then he telephoned my lawyer. And a week later, the contest of Lloyd's will was withdrawn. Quietly, with no reason given to the court or to anyone. There didn't need to be a reason. Glenda knew that I knew, and that all of it was written down in ink older than her grudge, and that a single word from me to the town or to the county sheriff would leave her explaining herself for the rest of her natural days. And here is the part I am proudest of in this whole sorry business. The part that finally let me sleep again at night. I never said that word. I could have. Believe me, I could have. I could have stood up at the very next church supper in that same basement and read out the full sum of what Glenda had quietly taken from her dying brother over 30 years, and watched the whole town turn on her exactly the way it had so nearly turned on me. The Lord knows that egg salad fork was sitting right there to be picked up. But I had spent 45 years carrying half this town's debts on a private list I never once read aloud. Not to my husband, not to my minister, not to a living soul. And I was not about to start reading debts aloud now, not even hers, not even after everything. So instead, I had Ms. Pelletier send Glenda one short, plain letter. It said that the will contest was over and done. It said that the accounts were closed. It said that the money her brother had given her across 30 years was forgiven, free and clear, as the gift his soft heart had always quietly intended it to be. And it said that her brother's books were clean and would stay private and would never be spoken of, on the one single condition that the talk in this town about Audrey Hartwell stopped that very day. The talk in this town stopped that very day. I'm 72 years old, and Hartwell's is still standing on the corner of Main and Bridge, and the little brass bell over the door still rings when you push it. And I'm behind the counter most mornings yet, though Donna does the heavy lifting now. Donna has worked beside me for 30 years, and through all of it, through the fork and the funeral and the whole long grass fire of talk, she never doubted me for a single second. Not once. And she'll have the store when I'm finished with it, free and clear. Because Donna is family in the only way that has ever actually counted, which has not one thing to do with blood or a name over a door. The town came back around, the way small towns always do, sheepish and quick, and suddenly certain they'd been on my side the whole time. I let them. 45 years behind a counter teaches you not to hold a person's worst day against them forever. Everybody's short with the cashier sometimes. The murmuring turned the way murmuring always turns. And these days, if Glenda's name comes up in this town at all, it's said with that little drop in the voice, that little pause, the exact one she spent a lifetime trying to attach to mine. Glenda I have not laid eyes on since the day the will contest was withdrawn. She sold her house and moved down to her daughter's in Connecticut. A woman alone now, with the resentment she fed and watered her whole long life, until, in the end, it turned around and ate her instead. And I'll tell you something that surprised me. I don't hate her. I'm too old for hate. It's a young woman's luxury and it doesn't keep. It just rots in the cellar of you. Mostly, when I think of Glenda now, I feel the one thing I never once expected to feel for her in 46 years, which is a kind of sorrow. Because she spent her whole life so dead certain that I had walked in and stolen her place in her own family, that she never once looked up long enough to notice there had been room at that table for the both of us all along. And now her brother's gone, and the store has my name and Donna's on it, and Glenda's got no place at any table, anywhere. And not one honest line in her own hand to prove she ever truly loved a soul. People think the cruelest theft is the one that takes your money. But I've learned, the hard way, at 72, that there's a worse one. There's the theft that takes your good name, that walks right into the church basement where you've served 45 years of funeral suppers and tells everyone you love that you're a liar and a robber and an outsider who was never really one of them. And the reason it's worse than losing money is this. Money you can earn back. $1 doesn't remember who took it. But a name, once a town has decided about it, leaning in over the lunch counter in that soft, sorrowful voice, is very nearly impossible to ever wash clean again. Very nearly. There is exactly one thing that washes it clean, and it is not anger, and it is not even being right. It is the quiet, daily, unglamorous, unwitnessed work of having actually been honest, year upon year upon year, when nobody was watching and nobody asked you to. In green cloth-bound ledgers nobody ever once requested to see. I did not keep those books for 45 years to defend myself someday. I had no idea a someday like this was ever coming. I kept them because old Harold Hartwell taught a frightened young bride that you write down where the money went, every day, in ink, and you do it whether anyone's looking or not. And it turned out I had been building, one honest line at a time across 4.5 decades, without ever once knowing it. The only fortress that has ever truly held against the lie. The truth, written down plainly as you go, in your own steady hand. So if you are out there tonight, and someone has set out to take your good name, has leaned in close at the post office in that gentle, ruinous voice and breathed, "I'm just saying it's strange." Let me tell you what 45 years behind a counter taught me. You cannot stop a liar from lying. You never could, and you never will. But you can live a life so plainly and stubbornly honest that when the day comes, and it may well come, the record of that life stands up on its own 2 feet and speaks for you in a voice 10 times louder and steadier than any liar's. Keep your own ledgers, friend. Not for the day of accusation, because you will never see that day coming. Keep them because an honest life, written down or not, is the one single thing on this earth that no other living soul can ever truly take from you, no matter how loudly they point the fork across the table. And watch, always watch, the one who screams thief the loudest and the soonest.
More often than you would ever care to believe, they are only trying with all their might to make you look away from their own hand, still down inside the till. If this story found you tonight, stay a while, and I'll have another for you soon. And tell me, down below, has anyone ever tried to take your good name? And did the truth come out in the end? And where in this world are you keeping me company from tonight? I read every single one. Take care of yourself and keep your books honest. You never know whose hand it'll be that points the finger.